Onto your headphones and pour your favorite beverage. It's time for the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. Now, fresh off the sidelines, your host, Matt McPeak.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? Welcome to the NFC East offseason recap 2020 season preview. I'm Matt McPeak. Thank you for joining the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. We're going to be talking the four teams in the NFC East today, one of the most competitive divisions every year. These games, every one of these games between these four teams is always fun to watch. It's like them in the NFC North, always great games. I love the AFC West. They're always great games. But let's start with these NFC East teams. So we got the Philadelphia Eagles, who finished 9-7. They were 5-1, in the division. So coming out of the bye week in Week 10, the Eagles were 5-4 with the tougher half of their schedule to go. But they lose at home to the Patriots 17-10 in a pretty ugly game. Then in Week 12, they lose at home to the Seahawks. Only scored one touchdown that game, and it was with 20 seconds left in the game. Then the Eagles' worst loss of the season, maybe the worst loss by any team all year. They gave up 37 points to the Miami Dolphins, and they lost that game. So they were left sitting at 5-7 with 4 games left, all in the division. So they still had a shot. They go on a 4-game winning streak and take the division. They hosted a wild card game in Philadelphia, despite having 3 fewer wins than the visiting Seahawk team. Carson Wentz was knocked out of that game by Jadeveon Clowney at the end of the first quarter. The Eagles failed to score a touchdown, and the game finished with the same score as their Week 12 matchup, 9-7. Dallas Goedert led the team in targets, catches, and receiving yards in that game, but they just couldn't do much at all on offense. It was too much for the rookie Miles Sanders and Zach Ertz and Goddard were really all they had left. It was pretty much Ertz getting triple teamed every play, and if you look back at his stat line from the first game that they played with the Eagles, he caught 12 of 14 targets for 91 yards and a touchdown. So the Seahawks were not going to let him beat them, which is why Goddard ended up having such a good game, but. You go back and you look at the Eagles' season as far as the wide receivers go, and it was horrible. They were all hurt. They were all missing time here and there. The guys that were playing were not playing very well. Miles Sanders and the tight ends completely carried that team with all the injuries that the Eagles suffered at wide receiver. Ertz and Goddard led the team in targets, receptions, and receiving yards on the season, and Sanders was third on the team in receptions. So the Eagles' top 3 players in catches were 2 tight ends and a running back. That was a rookie. He finished as the number 15 running back in half PPR last year, thanks in big part to his work in the passing game. He was 7th in the league in receiving yards among running backs, despite being 12th in targets. So he really made his target share. He was extremely efficient with the targets that he got. He is the clear-cut number 1 running back, and he should dominate the Eagles' backfield touches. Granted, they don't go out and sign a guy like Devontae Freeman. Fantasy Pros actually has him ranked as the number 13 running back going into 2020, right behind Aaron Jones at number 12. And if this kid from Boston College takes enough work from Aaron Jones, I think we could easily see Miles Sanders break into that top 12. He's got all the skill, he's got all the talent, and he seems like a good dude. The Eagles were, like I said, they were just killed by their wide receivers last year. They only got 10 games out of Alshon Jeffrey and Nelson Aguilar combined. Aguilar left. He took a one-year deal with the Raiders. And last year's big signing, they bring back Deshaun Jackson, and they only got 3 games out of him. And the only wide receiver to play in all 16 games for the Eagles was J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who caught only 10 passes for 170 yards. He played in every game, and he only caught 10 passes. So the wide receiver position was definitely the biggest need for the Eagles going into the offseason, especially with the team, the way that they're built right now. You got Carson Wentz on this big contract. You got to get him young players around him, or else they're going to have no shot. So the Eagles secondary had a lot of issues last year as well. So they had 9 different cornerbacks and 5 different safeties suit up on defense for them last year. So a total of 14 different defensive backs played for the Philadelphia Eagles last year. That's way too many. You need that position to have some cohesion, some communication between every guy back there. And when you have 14 of them going in and out each week, it's impossible. So their 2 best defensive backs both left in free agency. Malcolm Jenkins went back to New Orleans, and Ronald Darby left to go to the division rival Washington Redskins. Because of that, they signed 4 new defensive backs. So Rodney McLeod, Jalen Mills, 2 guys that they re-signed, but then Will Parker and Nikhil Roby-Coleman both signed this year. They traded a 3rd and a 5th round picks to Detroit for Darius Lee. So they got their big shutdown corner. They also lost defensive tackle Timmy Jernigan to Houston, so they signed Javon Hargrave from Pittsburgh. I was surprised they didn't address the wide receiver position at all in free agency. I figured they would maybe at least go after somebody, especially after they let Nelson Aguilar leave for the Raiders. But they ended up they let Jordan Howard go to go to Miami, setting up Miles Sanders to have this big lead role this year. And the Eagles were locked and loaded with 8 picks in the draft. And plus, they were the only team in the AFC East that has their head coach returning from last year, which this year could be a big deal. So with the first pick in the draft, the Eagles took Jalen Reagor at 21st overall. There was a lot of speculation that the Eagles would try and trade up in the draft and try and get one of those top 3 wide receivers. But they sat back at 21 knowing probably, hey, this draft is super deep at wide receiver, and hell, maybe Reagor was the guy that they wanted all along because he is kind of a perfect fit for Philly and for Carson Wentz. When Wentz had his best year, the Eagles were making plays deep down the field off of Carson Wentz scrambling around and extending plays. Reagor will hopefully bring that element of the offense back, something that they had for a couple games with Deshaun Jackson. But Jackson was supposed to be that guy last year, but again, he only played 3 games. Reagor can run every route. He's got legit speed and acceleration. He was one of the fastest guys in the draft. He's a big rack threat, so I think they will get him involved in the screen game and probably on jet sweeps. And he's best suited as a vertical receiver, like Deshaun Jackson, but he's not limited. He's not as limited to some of those deeper receivers or deeper routes like Jackson kind of is. He can run some of that lower intermediate stuff as well. So he's going to be fun to watch. He's going to be fun to watch grow with Doug Peterson, with Carson Wentz. And plus, if Deshaun Jackson can give them 8 games, right? So if they get both of their tight ends healthy, they get Deshaun for at least half of the season, right? And then they get Reagor on the other side. They keep Jeffrey as kind of a goal line guy. I don't want to call him a goal line guy, but use him situationally and not try him out there every single play. I think this Eagles offense could be great, but they got to stay healthy, man. It's really what it comes down to. With the 53rd pick, the Eagles take their new backup quarterback, Jalen Hertz. It was their second pick. I think this was a horrible pick. Not as bad as Green Bay's pick of Jordan Love, but it's pretty close if you ask me. I get it that Carson Wentz has missed the last 3 games of the 2017 regular season, and then he missed the Super Bowl run. The next year he misses 5 games. Then this past season he leaves in the first quarter of the playoff game. So I get it. You know, he's got these injury concerns. He plays like a linebacker, but there's talks of Hertz taking on a role similar to what Taysom Hill did last year with the Saints, which I don't see that either. Taysom Hill is an absolute freak of an athlete. They're both 6'2", 220, but Hill ran more than a tenth of a second faster in the 40-yard dash, which may not sound like a lot, but in scouting, it is. So I don't see Hertz blocking kicks or playing gunner on special teams. I don't see him running routes as a tight end. I just don't see it. So I don't understand the value of taking a guy that is going to most likely be just a backup quarterback for you in the second round, unless you have a guy like, Brett Favre as your starting quarterback. I don't see why you would use a second-round pick on a quarterback. But hey, I'm not a NFL GM, so what the hell do I know? Let's see here. In the third round, the Eagles took Davion Taylor, outside linebacker from Colorado. Linebacker was probably one of their biggest needs after wide receiver, so this was a good pick based off of need, but a lot of what I've read seems like he's going to be quite a project. He's played very little football for a third-round pick. He's a former basketball player and track runner, so he's definitely got the athleticism to play, but his vision and awareness and his football IQ are going to need some improvement, obviously, with a guy that has not really played all that much football. I don't think he's going to be an every down starter, at least not for a couple years maybe. So he was used primarily to cover tight ends in college. So I'm guessing that will kind of be his role to start off with. I know Malcolm Jenkins had that role for the Eagles last year. So with him gone, maybe they felt like they needed to get somebody to fill that need. So the key schedule run for the Eagles is pretty rough, man. Week 4, they're at the 49ers. Then they're at the Steelers in Week 5. 3 home games versus the Ravens, Giants, and Cowboys. Then the bye in Week 9, right smack in the middle of the season. So right before their bye, they got a pretty tough 5-run game or 5-run stretch. Then in Week 12, they get the Seahawks in Philly on Monday night. After they get Week 13 at the Packers, and then they're home versus the Saints. So another pretty rough run there. I don't think it's going to come down to the last game of the year like it did last season for the Eagles. I think we'll know by the end of Week 14 if they're going to be in the playoffs. So that's the Philadelphia Eagles. It's like half the episode right there. Jeez. All right, let's start with the Cowboys. The Cowboys had a big year as far as their offensive output, but the team as a whole was pretty mediocre. Jerry Jones finally decided it was Jason Garrett's time to go. They hired Mike McCarthy to get them to the playoffs and win in the playoffs, something Garrett could not do. He did have 1 year when they got robbed in Green Bay with that no-catch call on Dez Bryant, but besides that, it's been a pretty mediocre run for Jason Garrett with the Cowboys. They were first in yards per game and yards per play last year. They were 6th in points scored per game. Dak Prescott was 2nd in passing yards and 4th in TD passes on the season. But they had way too many horrible losses. Usually if you go 5-1 in your division, you have a pretty damn good shot of making the playoffs, but they only won 3 other games versus the Rams, Dolphins, and Lions, who combined finished 17-30 last year. So besides their 5 division wins, their 3 other wins were really not all that impressive. Their first loss was a 2-point loss to the Saints that Teddy Bridgewater started, in which they kept the Saints out of the end zone, which is no small feat, no matter who's starting at quarterback. The following game, they gave up 4 rushing touchdowns to Aaron Jones, and they lost to the Packers. Then they lose to the Jets and hand them their first win of the season. They bookended the bye week with division wins versus Philadelphia and at the Giants, but then they lost a home game against the Vikings after giving up 2 one-yard touchdown catches and a 2-point conversion to Kyle Rudolph. They beat the Lions, but they gave up 2 touchdown passes and a rushing touchdown to friggin' Jeff Driscoll. They were 6-6 heading into the last quarter of the season with 2 winnable games at the Bears and home against the Rams. and then 2 division games to finish out the season. And they gave up 3 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown to Mitchell Trubisky and lost that game. Then in Week 16, they still had a chance at the division playing at the Eagles, but they lost that game too. So the Cowboys did not deserve to be in the playoffs, mainly because of how bad the defense was, in my opinion. As far as the season off-season moves go, probably the biggest move came as no surprise. The Cowboys franchise tagged Dak Prescott. He'll make $31.4 million in 2020. Dak Prescott will make $31.5 million. So some may argue that on paper he deserves this big contract, but I would agree with the naysayers that say he still has a hell of a lot to prove before he deserves one of those contracts. But hell, so did Kirk Cousins, and he got that big deal. So I guess it's all the same. But we'll see how that goes. I do not see Dak Prescott as a $28+ million quarterback, but the market says what the market says, and if he's going to get that much somewhere else, then I guess the Cowboys are going to have to give it to him. In free agency, defense was hit pretty hard. Byron Jones, Robert Quinn, Jeff Heath, Malik Collins all left, but they did sign replacements at all of those spots with HaHa Clinton-Dix, Gerald McCoy, and Aldon Smith. That's right. Aldon Smith, who hasn't played in the NFL since Week 10 of the 2015 season. He signed a 1-year, $2 million per year deal. This puts DeMarcus Lawrence under a lot of pressure to be the steady pass rush presence. Last year was not Lawrence's year. Of his 3 seasons with either 15 or 16 games started, 2019 was his lowest in sacks, tackles for loss, quarterback hits, and total tackles. He's been going down in pretty much every category every year. You also have Randy Gregory, who didn't play last year, has only started in 1 game in his 3-year career. He has played in 28 games, 7 career sacks, but he's another dude who's had some issues staying on the field. Besides DeMarcus Lawrence, Aldon Smith, and Randy Gregory, the other 8 defensive ends or outside linebackers on the Cowboys have combined for 3 sacks. So you're taking shots here with Aldon Smith and Randy Gregory and DeMarcus Lawrence, who looks like he's kind of fallen off a little bit. So, plus they waited until the 5th round to draft a pass rusher. So the Cowboys are really gambling in the pass rush department in 2020. That's usually not a very good recipe for success. The Cowboys were at 17 in the draft, and when CeeDee Lamb, who many draft experts had as the number 1 wide receiver in the draft, was available, they just could not resist. Despite just giving Amari Cooper a 5-year, $100 million contract and Michael Gallup under contract for another 3 seasons, Lamb could easily take the number 2 wide receiver spot, or he could be their new slot receiver. My buddy Jimmy, who's a big Cowboys fan, thinks that CeeDee Lamb does not hurt Gallup or Amari Cooper. He thinks that there's enough volume in this offense for both Gallup and Cooper to have another 1,000-yard receiving season. I'm not sure I completely agree with him there, but we will have to wait and see how the Cowboys structure this offense. With a running back, mind you, Zeke, who needs 20 touches a game. He's not the kind of guy you just give 10 or 12 carries and maybe target him once or twice and call it a day, especially with that offensive line. So Jimmy also thinks they might be a little more conservative with his touches, which I also don't completely agree with. But, with this positive COVID test that he had about a month ago now, and with them having a pretty decent backup in Tony Pollard, maybe they do ease Zeke back in. Maybe they give him a smaller workload the first couple of games of the season and get Tony Pollard a little more involved. But, these are all things that we will not know until week 1. So they took 2 cornerbacks with their 2nd and 4th round picks, with a defensive tackle in the 3rd round. Their first corner they took was Stephon Diggs' little brother, Trayvon Diggs from Alabama. He's got the length and the size to be a press coverage guy, so he could fill Byron Jones' spot. Reggie Robinson, their 4th round corner, is also a big guy, 6'1", 205. He was a safety in high school, but transitioned to corner at Tulsa. Then with Travis Frederick retiring after last season with this super rare Guillain-Barré syndrome, I'm sure I said that wrong, the Cowboys had a massive need at center. They addressed it with their 5th-round pick by taking Tyler Bedaz from Wisconsin. They replaced one Wisconsin Badger for another. In the last 6 drafts, including 2020, Wisconsin has produced 20 NFL draft picks, and 5 of them were offensive linemen. They've produced 3 fantasy-relevant running backs since 2014, James White, Melvin Gordon, and this year, Jonathan Taylor. So Wisconsin knows how to pump out productive and proven offensive linemen, so I think he's going to step right in there, and he's going to fit great with the rest of those awesome offensive linemen that the Cowboys have. Their key schedule run Week 7 at the Redskins, then at the Eagles, 2 division games on the road. Then they're at home against the Steelers. They get the bye in Week 10, which is nice. Then they're at the Vikings, home against the Redskins, and at the Ravens in Week 13. So right in the middle of their season, they have probably the hardest stretch for them. Next, we got the New York Football Giants. They were 4-12, 2-4 in the division. 2019 brought us Eli's last year in the NFL. Unless a team offers him some crazy amount of money, we won't be seeing him until summer of 2025 when he gets into the Hall of Fame. It was a pretty rough season for the New York Giants. Their 4 wins were over the Redskins twice, who picked 2nd overall in the draft. In New York against the Dolphins, who picked 5th in the draft, and then the Buccaneers, who were 7-9 last year. So Eli did get the start of the season, or at least the first 2 games of the season, before they turned it over to Daniel Jones. Eli also got to play in Week 14, overtime loss to the Eagles, and in Week 15 at home against the Dolphins, with Daniel Jones dealing with an ankle injury, I think it was. Eli in those 2 games, though, threw for just 500 yards with 4 touchdowns, pretty good, but he did throw 3 interceptions against the Dolphins. The Giants still won that game. It was a nice opportunity for those Giant fans to kind of get behind Eli one last time. One young player that really stood out for them last year was rookie wide receiver Darius Slayton. He finished as the number 35 wide receiver in half PPR. He had the 5th highest average depth of target for wide receivers with at least 84 targets. So 84 targets is a pretty good number for a rookie, and for him to have the 5th highest average depth of target, which is how deep is the wide receiver or whoever the receiver is, how deep are they when they are targeted, also known as ADOT. He had a pretty prominent role as a deep threat last year, and he produced. Only played in 13 games. Yes, the Giants have a lot of options in the passing game. Obviously, with Saquon Barkley and Evan Ingram, then you also got Sterling Shepard and Golden Tate. But I think this set of pass catchers all complement each other really well, right? You got Slayton with his deep routes. Tate and Ingram are going to run everything underneath. Shepard will take all the intermediate level stuff, and then Saquon will get all of his touches, whether they're in the screen game or just little dump-offs. I think they will distribute the targets well enough that Slayton will still be a fantasy viable player even when everyone is healthy. Daniel Jones was super impressive in his first start last year at Tampa Bay in Week 3. He had 336 passing yards and only 23 completions. He had 2 touchdown passes plus another 2 rushing touchdowns with 28 rushing yards. He was sacked 5 times and he fumbled twice. He lost both of them in that game, though, which would be a sign of things to come for Daniel Jones. He finished tied as the 9th most sacked quarterback, and he only played in 13 games. He also led the league in fumbles, so he has a lot of work to do on holding on to the ball, and the Giants needed to get him a legit offensive line that could keep him clean. And I think the Giants did just that. So their new head coach, Joe Judge, is a former special teams coordinator with the Patriots, and their GM, Dave Gettleman, they're both pretty old school guys. So I was pretty convinced that they were going to focus on the fundamentals and get back to building, through the offensive and defensive lines. They signed the signing of Nate Solder 2 years ago has not really panned out, and Eric Flowers was a failure at both tackle spots. He was a first-round pick a couple years ago, so no surprise. The Giants took Andrew Thomas from Georgia with their fourth overall pick. In the second round, they got the safety from Alabama that had a first-round grade by a lot of scouts, Xavier McKinney. He'll play alongside Jabril Peppers, who they got in the trade for Odell Beckham, and that should give the Giants a pretty good set of young safeties going forward. In the third round, they continued to build up the offensive line with Matt Peart, tackle from UConn. Fourth round, they took another defensive back, Darnay Holmes, cornerback from UCLA. He was a returner in college, and he will most likely contribute on all four phases of special teams. He's another big corner that will probably play a lot of press, maybe bump inside and play nickel. He was above average. He has above average makeup speed. The dude is quick as hell, but you didn't really see it all that much because he was such a great cover guy. So I think we're going to see him play this year. And in the fifth round, the Giants drafted their third offensive lineman of this draft, Shane Lemieux from Oregon. The Giants now have 14 offensive linemen under contract, or these three rookies that are waiting to sign their contracts. It is going to be crazy to see which ones they end up keeping. Maybe it might work out for him with this year with all the craziness going on. That maybe the practice squad gets expanded, or you're allowed to maybe dress an extra pair of offensive linemen or something. So the Giants might benefit here, or they could end up cutting a really good offensive lineman that will probably make somebody else's practice squad. They're definitely going to They're going to be a position that other teams keep an eye on throughout training camp. The Giants made 5 picks after the 5th round. 4 of them were in the 7th round, and they took 4 linebackers and another corner. Overall, I think the Giants had a great draft. They needed to upgrade the offensive line in a very bad way, and they needed to add to the secondary, and they did just that. You got to figure that they hit on at least one of these late-round linebackers. Geez, they drafted 4 of them. I think they still could have taken another pass rusher with the newly signed Kyle Fackrell only agreeing to a 1-year deal. But if they can get this offensive line right, they have everything else on offense to be successful. The secondary should be way better with the additions of James Bradbury, Nate Eber, and these 3 rookies. Their key schedule run, week 3, they're at home against the 49ers. Then they go out to L.A. to play at the Rams in week 4. Then 5 of the next 6 games are all in the division. They're at Dallas week 5. Week 6, they're versus the Redskins at home. Week 7, they're at the Eagles. Week 8, they get a little break from the division games, and they get to host Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. And then in week 9, they're at the Redskins. Last game before the bye at home versus the Eagles. So pretty rough for the New York Football Giants. And last but not least, we have the Washington Redskins. Washington's 3 wins came against 3 teams that picked in the top 7 of the draft, and they all finished last year last in their division, right? So you got the Detroit Lions, the Miami Dolphins, the Carolina Panthers. They were dead last in points per game. They were dead last in first downs per game, average time of possession per game, passing yards per game. They were 31st in total yards per game. Even the running game, which was the strength of the team, they finished with the 10th fewest rushing yards per game. So the offense was just atrocious. Jay Gruden got the team to 9-7 in his second season with the Redskins in 2015, lost the wild card round that year. The Redskins' record has gotten worse every single year since then, over the 4 seasons since that playoff run. I really don't think it was really all Gruden's fault, though. The Redskins brass screwed up a whole lot during his reign. In particular, the Kirk Cousins situation. They royally screwed up the Trent Williams situation, which they just traded him like a week or 2 ago, and I think all they got for him was a 5th-round pick or something. Pretty pathetic for an all-pro left tackle. And they probably forced the Dwayne Haskins draft because of his connection to the area. They've also gotten pretty unlucky with injuries, from Jordan Reed's constant concussions every single year. Darius Geis's knee injuries, most recently the Alex Smith injury, which just had a E60 episode done on that. And if you haven't seen it, if you don't know what happened to this dude's leg, go watch that show. It is insane. But my guy, Wayne Wyatt, lifelong Redskins fan, says he thinks the biggest thing to come of this offseason is the fact that Bruce Allen got fired. He loves the new head coach, Ron Rivera, and he really likes the new defensive coordinator, Jack Del Rio. Del Rio was the defensive coordinator for the 2002 Panthers and the 2013 Broncos, who both went to the Super Bowl. They both lost, but Del Rio definitely knows how to coach a defense. Him and Rivera are both former players, both former linebackers, two guys that you want to play for. They seem to be on the right track. Next is figure out if they have a franchise quarterback in Dwayne Haskins. So Haskins was drafted in the first round in 2018. He started 7 games and led his team to 2 of their 3 wins. Case Keenum started the first 8 games and went 1-7. I think the plan was to have Haskins sit in 2019, but because Keenum was so bad, they were forced to play the rookie. He only threw 7 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. He averaged 175 passing yards a game in those 7 games that he started, but did not look like a first-round pick. As my friend Wayne pointed out, you had a horrible offensive line, and besides the rookie standout wide receiver Terry McLaurin and the future Hall of Fame running back Adrian Peterson, the Redskins had virtually nothing on offense as far as playmakers go. So you give a rookie, a fellow rookie and a really old running back, and that's it, plus a really bad offensive line. You can't really expect too much from them, especially their defense was horrible too. So they allowed the third most fantasy points to tight ends, the 4th most fantasy points to running backs, and the 10th most fantasy points to quarterbacks and wide receivers. So the Washington Redskins were a great matchup for every single player in fantasy football last year. Ron Rivera, whoever's in charge of personnel there in Washington, they got a pretty uphill battle with this team. They started off by franchising Brandon Sheriff. They signed 15 new players, re-signed 3 of them. They got rid of both quarterbacks, and they traded a 5th-round pick for Kyle Allen. So Ron Rivera has at least one of the quarterbacks that he had with him from Carolina. They made a whole lot of moves at running back. Chris Thompson and Wendell Smallwood are both gone, but they bring in Peyton Barber and J.D. McKissick to join Darius Geis, Adrian Peterson, and Bryce Love, who is still rehabbing from his knee injury. At tight end, Jordan Reed and Vernon Davis are let go, and they bring in Richard Rodgers and Logan Thomas. Very busy free agency for the Redskins. On defense, the Redskins allowed 6 defensive backs to walk away, including Josh Norman. They signed 3 veteran defensive backs, Kendall Fuller, Ronald Darby, Sean Davis, who will play with Landon Collins and kind of give that secondary some stability as they build the rest of this defense around this awesome defensive line that they have. The Redskins have been quietly building one hell of a defensive line. The only issue is that Rivera and Del Rio will bring with them a base 4-3 defensive alignment, whereas the Redskins have played a 3-4 for the past 10 years or so. But all these guys have the talent to be able to make that transition easily, I think. So their first-round pick in 2017, Jonathan Allen will likely kick in from defensive end to defensive tackle. Their first-round pick from 2018, Deron Payne, will be their anchor at nose tackle. First-round pick from 2019, Montez Sweat will play on one end, and first-round pick from 2020, Chase Young will play on the other end. So 4 first-round picks on the defensive line. They have the line to be a dominating defense if they can all play around that defensive line. It's going to be fun to watch for sure. So after the Chase Young pick in the first round, the Redskins had to wait until the 3rd round to get their next pick, which was pretty puzzling to me. They take a hybrid running back wide receiver from Memphis, Antonio Gibson. Out of his 78 career offensive touches in college, 44 were receptions. So I guess you can say he's kind of more of a receiver than a runner. But either way, the Redskins already had 6 running backs on the roster. But they must have saw something in him that they really liked. They had 2 4th-round picks And with the first one, they took an offensive lineman from LSU. With the other, they took wide receiver Antonio Gandy Golden from Liberty, he's got a huge catch radius, but he's not all that polished as a route runner. The Redskins are hoping with maybe a little bit of work, Gandon Goldie can develop into a solid secondary option to Terry Maclaurin. Terry Maclaurin was by far the biggest standout for the Redskins last year. He finished as the number 27 wide receiver, with probably the worst play from his quarterback in the league. I'd love to see what he can do if this Haskins kid can, take the next step and if the offensive line can actually protect him. So their key schedule run week 12 at Dallas, then at the Steelers. They're at the 49ers, then versus the Seahawks in week 15. So that's a pretty rough 3-game away stretch, and then a really tough home game coming off of that stretch. So good luck to the Redskins. I would not be surprised if we're looking at another, 4-12, 5-11 type season from the Redskins. But this defensive line, dude, holy crap. I did not realize the amount of talent that they had on that line. So that's going to be something to keep in mind if you are somebody that's getting, you're going to pick Saquon or Zeke or Miles Sanders. Know that they're going to play 2 games against what could be one of the most talented defensive lines in football with the Washington Redskins. So thank you to my guys, Jimmy and Wayne, for giving me some insight onto the Redskins and the Cowboys. Thank you guys for tuning into the episode. Next week, we're going to run through the NFC North. So make sure you tune in for that. And as always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. For more great episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Kickin' or Stickin' is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach.tv, or your favorite podcast service. Kickin' or Stickin' is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gambling operates the National Problem Gambling Helpline Network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to play responsibly and always look for your man downfield.